Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mental Melodies. This is your host, Carmynn Bradley. We are on episode 7. I totally lost track. I thought it was 6, so that's pretty crazy. And I'm hearing rumors that there are a lot of people watching, which is really cool, and I'm really, really grateful for that. Last week, I had my first guest. His name was JC, and we had just a really great, really profound episode about life and about trauma and about past lives and about the trick, I believe, in learning like how your childhood created who you are, but not getting stuck in that. So I actually had a quote I wanted to read you all about that. I take screenshots of stuff I see on Facebook, and then I print them out. This is the wrong quote. I have so many of them. This is the wrong quote too. Here it is. Okay. It says the past is a place of reference, not a place of residence. The past is a place of learning, not a place of living. And this is something that JC and I were talking about a lot last week that I think is really, really important when you're starting to work on your trauma and you're delving deeply and you're understanding who you are and why you are the way that you are. Because it's really, really easy to get stuck in this talk in circle thing. And if you've been to therapy before, I don't know what the statistics are on how many people continue with therapy and how many people don't. But I know that a trap that we often get into when we first find a therapist is that we just start talking in circles. And we talk about what happened and we talk about why it happened, and we gain this sense of awareness of why we are the way that we are, but then we never move forward from that. And that can be really, really challenging to figure out, okay, now that I understand that I am the way that I am because of the way that I was raised, what do I do with that information? And so it's really important to remember that, like this quote says, it's a place of reference, but it's not a place to live. You shouldn't be always going back into your past and then sitting back and throwing your hands up and saying, well, this is just the way that I am. And that's where it starts to get complicated, because I think one of the questions that I've had about myself that's been really hard to answer is who was I before the world got to me? And I think it's hard to figure out how early you have to go back to figure that out. But I was reading something the other day that was talking about basically ages 2 to 4 is kind of where you're in your most natural state and you're exploring and you're playing. And then what happens sometimes, there was this really great example of a kid who's in his dad's room and he's playing with his dad's guitar, and then he gets spanked because his dad doesn't want him to play with the guitar. But the kid is confused about that and doesn't know why he's getting in trouble because he's just playing. And this feeds in a lot to the gentle parenting movement, which I know not everybody is down for. And I'm not a parent, so I can't definitively say this is the right way to parent your children. And I know it's much easier said than done. However, what's happening a lot is that grown-ups are forgetting that kids do not understand as much as I think grown-ups think that they do. When I was teaching high school, I learned that my students needed me to repeat things much more than I wanted to. And that is a thing that a lot of teachers get hung up on. Why should I have to repeat myself over and over again? I already told you to sit down, start your paper, put your name on the paper. Simple things that you would expect them to remember. And yet parents often expect their 3-year-old or their 4-year-old or their 5-year-old to remember not to touch something. And I think that what happens is we start to stifle children's creativity. Right? And school does that too. It completely stifles creativity. What happens is you are just told what to do, and you're told what to write and what to say and what to learn and what to memorize, and you're not really being taught how to think. And I can say for me personally that I feel that I was a very creative child, and I was musically inclined as a child, but something about that got lost when I went to school, because one of my other personality traits, which I haven't quite figured out if it's because of how I was raised or if it's because of who I am. But I have this personality trait where I like to, not so much anymore, but I like to follow the rules, I guess. Like, do things the right way. And I still am kind of like that, but just not as much as I used to be. And I definitely have a lot of fun and curiosity in like trying to delve into being a little bit more of a rebel. But when I was in high school, I did not talk when the teacher told me not to. I did not share test answers. Like, I did everything by the book. Now, you could say that this is because of how I grew up, which goes back to what I kind of started the episode off of, right? Like, my stepfather was a very, very strict human being. And so I lived in a household where I felt like I was walking on eggshells. I was always asking my mom, like, when is he going to be home? Because I felt like I could be free until he got home. And yet at the same time, I couldn't always be free because there was always this anxiety that he's going to come home and something's going to happen, or just in general, like, the fun would be gone. He was such a fun killer. And so it's interesting diving into, again, just understanding that that definitely played a role in the fact that I was such a rule follower, because what happens when you're a kid is you adjust to the emotions in your environment and you essentially learn how to survive. So I learned how to survive kind of by like biting my tongue or just following the rules. That ended up changing when I was a teenager, and there was a part like inside of me that just couldn't really handle that reality anymore, and I wanted to speak the truth. And the interesting thing that's been happening lately in this journey to like figuring out, again, just like who I am and who I am outside of the world. And I think it's not impossible, but it's very hard to like just dig through everything and find the core, because in that journey, I'm still living life and I'm still being influenced by the people around me, and I'm changing all of the time. So I'm going through this journey to find who I am as I'm also like becoming an entirely new person. And I think that's like the beauty of life. But one of the things that I've been meaning to bring up in the past few episodes that I just haven't had the time for, was just this journey through your past lives. And by that, I just mean like the various versions of yourself. And I think the older that you get, you can start to kind of distinguish like the eras of your life, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like I had this era from like junior high till the end of high school, and then I had a big shift in who I was for college, and then those 4 years were kind of a different version of myself. And then there's the version of myself that was like a teacher, and then there was the version of myself that was a therapist, and now there's this version of myself now that's an artist, but also is the culmination of all those different versions like coming together. And so what I've been doing is playing around with diving into energies from my past life and taking the good but leaving the bad. So I've said a couple things I've said are from songs that I've played in the last few weeks. So like taking the good and leaving the bad is from that song Sometimes. And it's just like a really profound lesson that I learned. And I initially learned it from relationships, because relationships are in our life to be a mirror anyway, right? So like people come into your life to show you about you, I think, and then you kind of get to choose, like, is this a version of myself that I want to be? And so I learned that lesson because of relationships, and then realized that it also applied to versions of myself. So there are a lot of things, I think I did mention this before, I've had like a lot of shame about certain versions of myself, like because I was really struggling in my 20s. But what I've been able to do is to peel that away and stop shaming my past self, and instead getting to know her and getting to know the strengths that she had, and then highlighting those strengths. So I'm being reminded of how I explained PTSD and how it works in the brain, and narrative therapy. Those are two things that I've brought up a lot. So in narrative therapy, reminder, you are telling your story, and then you're learning how to retell your story to include the things that you often don't include. Because what happens with PTSD is that the negative memories, specifically the traumatic memories, are stronger, and they're constantly being triggered, or they're constantly turned on. Like if you're having flashbacks all of the time, then you're living in the past. And we talked about how that's not where you're supposed to be. It's not a place of residence. So how do you get out of that? And when you're essentially a victim of your own PTSD, that's really hard because you come to therapy like looking for help. Please solve this problem for me or whatever. And for one thing, like a therapist cannot solve your problems for you. They are there to help you. And so even if you're going to therapy, like I mentioned in the beginning, it is possible that you're not benefiting from it at all. Because if you're just talking in circles or you're just repeating the same things and then going out and doing the same things in your life, you're not going to experience any change. And what we often do is we then blame. We blame our therapist, or we blame our friends, or we blame anything outside of us in order to not take a look inside of ourselves and change something. So that's why a lot of what I talk about on this show is about habit building and habit forming, because it really does take changing the small things about your life in order to change like the big things or the philosophical things, or to find out who you are and figure out what your identity is. So when it comes to like my own story, I used to be in that state of trauma where I was having a lot of flashbacks and I was having a lot of negative dreams, and I felt like victim to my life and what had happened to me. And I've noticed now that because I processed that, because I peeled those layers away, I can now take versions of myself and see how there was actually a lot of good. And that's a really, really beautiful thing, that you can change the way you see your own life story. And then it starts to just get less heavy and heavy over time, and it gets lighter. And it's just really, really a cool thing. So I'm going to pause there so that I can kind of shift gears in the next segment, and I will be back in a minute.
Hello, everyone. This is Joseph Skoda with Social Media Shows. Well, I thank all of you for your support through these last several years, and it's been a lot of fun. We've given people a voice they never had before. Now, Social Media Shows is always collaborating with our veterans to help them do things and help out the veterans who are struggling today. And we teamed up with GI Connections, connecting veterans with resources. So please consider helping and donating to this great cause, because we're always doing things for veterans. So GI Connections, Social Media Shows, and you is what makes the world a better place. Once again, Joseph Skoda, proud United States Air Force veteran.
Hi, I'm Deacon T with Modern Word Ministries. It's great to be with you today. Just a short little promo for our show. Every Sunday morning we have service, and you can follow us at 10 a.m. Pacific time on modernwordministries.org. And if you missed us or you want to see some of our older messages, go ahead and check us out on socialmediashows.com every single morning at 9 a.m. It's a great way to kick off your day, get a little bit of the word in you, get something uplifting, get you started off on your way. You know, if you're looking for prayer or you need some help, reach out to us. If you go to our website, again, that's modernwordministries.org, you can interact with me via telephone, via DM, text message, whatever you want. I'll get right back to you. So if you need prayer, you need help, you just need somebody to talk to, Modern Word Ministries is here for you. We are your church in the community. So until you see you next time, be blessed, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hi everyone, welcome back. Mental Melodies, episode 7, segment 2. This is Carmynn Bradley, your host. I was talking about narrative therapy and PTSD, and specifically in layman's terms, how to change your life story. And the fascinating thing, which I just realized to talk about, is that this actually changes on like a microbiological level. And I mentioned before that I don't have the specific research for it, but I could find it, and maybe I will before next episode if I have time. But I remember saying something about how there isn't enough research about this like a few episodes ago. And there's been so many episodes now that I can't even remember specifically which one it was, which is pretty cool. But I did see something from Joe Dispenza pop up the other day on social media. And he's someone I've mentioned before. He wrote that book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, among other books, but that's the one that I read. And I mentioned that it's about manifestation. But he talks about the benefits of meditation and all of these things that like I believe in that a lot of people don't believe in. And I guess at this point, it's like, it is scientific at this point. So it's not something I think that people can really deny as much anymore. Where was I going with this? Oh, yes. So when you change your story, you are literally changing the way that your brain is processing everything, right? So I think about the technique that I used to use as a therapist. It's called parts in memory. I think I've mentioned it before. And what you do is you get into this kind of like deep state, and you find the parts of yourself that are bringing up the symptoms. So let's say I'll tell my therapist, I'm experiencing a lot of anger. Like I get really triggered when XYZ happens. And this was something that happened in my last relationship. So what would happen is you would sit there and you would think about that until you find a feeling in your body and you find that anger. And then you imagine taking a step back from it and you talk to that part of yourself. And you find an image, and then what you do is you jump into the earliest memory that that part of you has. So that ties into what I was talking about, is that essentially your consciousness is made up of multiple different parts. That's why I say it's like hard to find out like who you are, because there's this image of identity that one of my supervisors in the mental health field would explain to us. He would say, your identity is more like a university. It's not just one thing. So if you think of a university, it has the biology building and the English department and the chemistry department and the arts department and all of these different things. Your identity is like that as well. So you have an angry part that comes out when you're angry, and you have a sad part that comes out when you're sad. And then it's more than just emotions. You have, like I said, I have this part of me that's like from ages 15 to 18, or I have this part of me that's like from ages 21 to 22. And these parts of you are formed from memories, which is why I think Inside Out is one of the most profound movies ever. Please watch it if you haven't seen it, but it talks about core memories and how they create your identity, and that's 100% absolutely true. So if you think about like that scene in that movie where her happy kid core memories, they like crash, you could think about that as like the end of that era. So I was mentioning how I have these various selves, like, you know, your baby self, your toddler self, your young self. It's like, well, when does that part end? And often it's when trauma happens or when a big change happens, right? Because those core memories they're going to change if you have different people around you. Maybe your core memories from when you were young included grandparents, and then your grandparents passed away, and so that's a big shift. So you can start to kind of see where these different parts of you begin and end depending on what happens. So what I was talking about was how my own story had shifted from being like dark or always blue to being more joyful, just like what happened in the movie. So there's another quote that I wanted to share with you about this, since I'm kind of talking about trauma. It says, trauma teaches you to close your heart and armor up. Healing teaches you to open your heart and boundary up. And I just like absolutely love that because it is very true, and it speaks to me a lot when I think about like where I was. Specifically, I guess in my mind, I'm going back to that like my 20s era, where I was very much being affected by my trauma. I mentioned before that I was having like flashbacks every day. I was having nightmares. I was unable to keep friendships. I was flaky. I couldn't respond. I was overwhelmed. My dogs were like ripping up books everywhere, and I couldn't catch up. I didn't invite people over to my house. I stopped hanging out even with my sister. There's just like relationships that completely changed because of what I was going through then. And so like going back to that, trauma closed my heart up, because what was happening is I was in constant fight or flight. And I mentioned this, I think last week or the week before, but that's what's happening when you're in PTSD, right? Is that you're always in fight or flight, which is not a healthy way to be. You need to learn how to relax, and your body needs to be able to go into fight or flight when it needs to, like if there's a bear, and then you need to be able to relax and go back to a state where you feel safe. But people with PTSD are constantly looking over their shoulder, and it can lead to things like schizophrenia. And this is something that I did notice as a working therapist, was that that's kind of how mental health works, is it's kind of like an onion. And you have to kind of peel back the layers. And this is just a theory that I have, but I do believe it's true because I saw it happen with me. So you come into the office and you present with an issue. So like my main issue when I was in my early 20s was my eating disorder. And I was also depressed, and I was also suicidal, and there were also all these other terrible things going on. And that can be really hard to navigate as a therapist, because it's like, what do you attack first? So essentially you have to figure out what's taking up the most brain space or the most energy. So like for an eating disorder, you're constantly thinking about food, or you're constantly thinking about how fat you think you are. And so if your mind is there 90% of the time, which mine was, that's the thing that you work on first. And then once you start to heal that, which took forever, you can find out what's underneath that. What's underneath that could be another mental illness. But I've said this before, and I think my main overall takeaway from this show is that I want people to know that healing can happen. What often happens is you get into therapy and then you're stuck there and you're in therapy for the rest of your life. I've had clients who had been in therapy for 30, 40 years, and they would talk about the same things every time. And that's hard as a therapist, because you're not sure, like, if it's on you, like, what can you do differently to help somebody out of a rut. But at the end of the day, like I said, like 20 minutes ago, change is truly up to you. And part of the reason why when I first went to therapy, I didn't change is because I wouldn't come back, or I couldn't take a step outside myself and see myself. And it's hard when you're in those moments of extreme crisis to do that anyway. If you are constantly on edge, or you're constantly having flashbacks, it is so hard to get to a point where you can even think about those things. Which is why I've mentioned before that the first step often, if you're in that space, is to get into your body. So like yoga is the thing that helped me heal in the beginning, and helped me also just deal with what I was going through, because I used to be in a state of panic forever, like all day long. And this even was going on when I moved to Las Vegas. I was 28 years old, and I was starting to try and figure out like how to have friendships and stuff. And I found friends who didn't think it was weird that I would lay down on the floor in child's pose for like 20 minutes every time I felt like I just couldn't handle it anymore. And I would just be there, and I would essentially go through this like panic attack in my mind. And being there in my body and being in my breath and being very close to the floor helped me to get through that. And when I started to realize that and continued to do yoga and continued to embrace my breath and be with my body and be grounded, the fight or flight started to go away. And I think it took like 2 or 3 years of constant daily yoga, like more than 4 hours a day even, to get to the point where I was no longer panicking anymore. That's how long it took. Like, saying that out loud is actually crazy, because the thing about my yoga practice now is that it's not completely gone, but it's evolved over time. And that's something, I gotta slow down here because I have so many different thoughts coming at me and I'm trying to like have one narrative. But essentially I've had this when I'll compare myself to my past life. So I'm talking about, this is like a theme for today, where I'm looking back at my past selves and I'm trying to pull good things, right? And so one good thing from that era was yoga, and it was movement, and I was running a lot, and there was a lot of writing happening and a lot of singing, but it was very frantic and very all over the place and very just like almost more responsive than reactive. And I think that's the thing. Trauma puts you in a response. You're constantly responding to life. You are reacting to life instead of being able to like just be in your own energy and not let life affect you at all. There's this great word, equanimity. It's actually the name of the business for my mentor from when I was a therapist. He's just an awesome person. But equanimity means that you can be like a mountain, and life can hit you, and you can feel something. It can even, like, the feeling can go through you, but you're not shaken by it. Your mountain doesn't fall. Maybe a better image would be like a tree, and this is something we actually do in yoga to mimic this process, I guess you could call it, is that, like, you stand on one leg and you see how long you can balance, and then you practice. Like, imagine that there's wind, and you can imagine it's like an emotion, and what's happening is you're noticing that you're getting off balance, and you continue to practice until you can stand there no matter what. And so it's just like, I was talking about getting into your body being the first step, and how the fact that it took me so long of doing yoga and doing breath work to get to the point where I was no longer in fight or flight is crazy. But what I think that does is it just validates how slow this process is. And there's something like a takeaway from this that came up in my mind earlier, is just that you have to have a lot of grace for yourself in this process, because you have to meet yourself where you're at. And if where you're at right now is like you're just not ready to go into that trauma and to meet those versions of yourself, and you're not ready to get the good, then maybe what you're ready to do is just simply figure out how to be in your body and be comfortable with your body and learn how to breathe and exist in your space. So more on that after the break.
Traditional TV is going away. Hollywood is starting to fade. People are demanding real stories from real people. Our voices are now being heard in our own way. Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok Live are becoming the norm. Internet TV has now reached the highest demand in human history. Social media shows is now the new media of the century.
The year is 2980, and we now know that death is not the end. A soul can be extracted from the recently deceased and be used to create a blue liquid called essence. It can bring a person back to life.
We'll get her back.
I hope so.
It's an expensive process used by the rich and powerful. The rest, they do what they can to survive.
Stay right there.
You told me you're hiding from some dangerous people.
Let's knock on the door. I spent the last year searching for the Deep Star. A bounty so big that the entire galaxy could be yours.
People have been looking for the Deep Star for years. It can't be found.
It's because they can't find the distress beacon. I know where it is.
If we find the Deep Star, we could get enough credits to bring Mom back.
Blast off.
Guys, we have company.
You can run, but you cannot hide. Prepare for impact.
I am now authorized to take action.
And now you die.
No!
Welcome back, Mental Melodies. Carmynn Bradley here, your host of this show. I've been talking about being in your body, and to kind of like recap how I got there, I was talking about how mental illness kind of works as layers. And again, this is just like a theory that I've been working with, and I would love to write about it one day. But I believe that if you have a mental illness, you can peel apart the layers and you can find what's underneath, and you can continue to do that until you figure out who you are, and that is a lifelong process. But I just genuinely don't believe that it is a not a death sentence, but that's the word or the phrase that came to mind. In a way though, yeah, because I think if you're stuck in depression for the rest of your life and that's your reality, and you are the depressed person who takes Prozac or whatever it is that you take, and you do that the rest of your life, I I think that's a death sentence, because I think it takes away from the joy that you can have in life, right? Because depression is essentially like a ceiling over your head, and you can't ever get out, or you're constantly like treading water, and that is not a great feeling to have. So I genuinely believe that you can heal from that. But like I've said multiple times this episode, that is on you, and it's on you to find help. And when you get help, it's on you to realize that it's help and that it isn't the work that you have to do, right? And I've also said in the last segment, like, it's really important to have grace for yourself, because that can be exhausting. And like, I'm currently not in therapy right now because I needed to take a break from it, and that is totally valid. And I think that's part of the process, is being able to take a step back from your healing journey, and then to just kind of live your life for a minute, and then maybe go back into it and start to talk about it. But it can be really exhausting to constantly be analyzing your behaviors and figuring out how to change. But it's also very enlivening and very inspiring. I love opposites. If you've been watching for a while, you know that, because I talk about duality a lot. And I started the episode talking about duality because that's what my friend JC mentioned last week, right? He gave this beautiful image of an altar, and it's a Christian image, but it's about how altars nowadays we think of, like in the yoga world, for example, we have like nice little stones everywhere, and we, like pray or burn little things, and it's a very pretty little thing. But altars used to be like the slicing of an animal's neck, and it was the very real and raw reality of what life is. And we were talking last week about how there's not enough of that these days. Everything is in this like state of extreme, and so we have this like social media world where everything is good and everything is pretty and everybody is happy and everybody loves being a parent and everybody's traveling and blah 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 blah, and you don't get to see the actual reality of people's lives. And I remember back when I was like in my early 20s, and I went through this stage where I was sharing my mental illness on social media, and it was kind of like a no-no, like a taboo. Like, we don't want to hear that you're really depressed today, or we don't want to hear this, that, or this. But what I was doing in that time was I was genuinely trying to heal, and what I was doing was I was keeping track of my emotions on a daily basis. But my emotions were very heavy, and not everyone wanted to deal with it. On the flip side, I remember getting positive feedback at that time as well from people who felt empowered by it. And so I think back on like bringing JC on last week, and just the healing power of having somebody else next to me saying, yes, I've struggled with this too. And it's just such a beautiful thing. So I was talking earlier about how people are mirrors in your life, and it is so important to be able to benefit from those relationships. So anyway, I was talking about how mental illness, you have to peel back the layers, right? So when I was doing yoga a lot and I was trying to heal specifically from my eating disorder, I had kind of made a decision at that time that that was the one thing I needed to focus on. And this is a huge theme for me that I've brought up in past episodes, because right now for me, my thing is my music. And I've mentioned the struggle to get to that point. And it was actually just now, like just a second ago, that I realized that at that time I had done the same thing for my eating disorder, where it was like, I have so many things I'm dealing with and struggling with, but right now I need to focus on my relationship with my body. And so not only was it breathing and getting out of a fight or flight mode, it was also learning to literally love my body. And I bought this plate that said enjoy on it, and I was making food that made me happy, and I was gaining weight, but I was accepting that, and I was running a lot, and I was just literally doing a lot of physical work in order to peel back those layers and to figure out how to heal from body dysmorphia as well, which is something that is so complicated. And I would love to be more involved with research on that, because there have been times where I saw a picture for years and hated it, and then after this process that I went through, I saw the picture again and noticed that I did not look as big as I thought I did, or as ugly as I thought I did. And so I have moments now where I can tell that I think what it is it's a part. I mentioned this, like parts in memory therapy. There are parts of you that can essentially like take the driver's seat. And so for a while, I think if you're in like a constant eating disorder state, you have this part of you that doesn't like your body and that is convinced your body is too whatever, too thin, too fat, whatever you think. That part of you is like the driver for your consciousness. And so we talk about healing. It's like you have to take fear out of the driver's seat, or you have to take this eating disorder part out of the driver's seat, and you have to find control over your life again. So there was another quote I wanted to read today, because it's the day for quotes, because I've talked a lot about like self-responsibility and also about how it's like a slow process, and how small habits really, really matter. So this is another one that I found on, I think it was Facebook. I just take screenshots and print them out. It says, habit is far more dependable than inspiration. Make progress by making habits. Don't focus on getting into shape. This is just an example, but it applies to anything. Focus on becoming the kind of person who never misses a workout. And this is, I think that like losing weight is just such a, it's such an applicable example. I think most everybody has tried to do it at some point and has either succeeded or not. And I think that when you talk about success in losing weight, it's just so complicated because it's often not really the goal that you should have. And I guess it depends, because there's extreme examples. But essentially this is saying like, you can be inspired in a moment like January 1st and go to the gym, and then you fall off because your motivation is not strong enough. One moment of like, yeah, I'm going to do this. This is really cool, does not last for a very long time. So you have to find something underneath it all that is your motivating factor, or just consciously try to change your motivating factor. So when it's saying focus on becoming the kind of person who doesn't miss a workout, I believe you genuinely have to ask yourself like who you want to be. And I've mentioned like my vision boards before, and back in 2020 I made this vision board that literally did change my life. And what I did is I reflected on things that I was missing in my life, and I said I want to be somebody who follows through on things. And I just made it my mission that if I decided I was going to do something, that I would do it and I would follow through on it. And that means that if I decide I'm going to do something that's going to take a really long time, I then have to go back to where I am now and say, okay, what are the steps to get there, and make a plan in order to get to the end. And this is something that there was an actor who came to our acting school before, and he talked about this, and he talked about how having a plan is really, really important. And I love when people talk about how big dreams shouldn't even really be called dreams. They should be called plans. Because when we start to call things dreams, then we're like feeding into this idea that it's a fantasy. So I want to be a very successful recording artist. If I tell people that and I say it's a dream of mine, then I can just sit back and sing that nice song from Tangled and wish and hope and sit in my room and eat Cheetos and like hope that it happens and hope that it falls in my lap. But if I call it a plan and I say, here are the gaps that I need to fill to get to where I need to go, then I'm signing up for guitar lessons, which I've done. And I'm doing that week after week. And I'm learning music theory that I should have learned when I was a kid, back to what I talked about in the beginning of the episode, right? Like I was musically inclined and then school trumped my creativity. And so I'm filling in the blanks now. And things just keep happening because of that. And there is that balance, which I've talked about before, of being able to surrender and essentially relax into your moment, but also to take guided, intentional steps forward toward where you want to go. And so this applies to your mental health as well. If you're somebody who's struggling with PTSD, is just the thing that's been coming to my mind in the last couple episodes, or an eating disorder. If you're struggling with those two things, you have to think about like what kind of person you want to be. And that might be 5-10 years from now. And then you have to take yourself back to where you are in this moment and say, okay, so what does that mean for me today? And something that like saved my life back when I first started this process was figuring out morning routines and nightly routines and how to structure my day. So one good place to start, if you don't know where to start, is to change the way that you start your day. And I remember saying this to a lot of my clients before, and this is why I keep throwing it out there today, that it is so on you, because the number of times that people would be saying, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that, and I'd be like, well, how's your morning routine? Oh, it's okay. And then they wouldn't want to commit to that, getting up 5 minutes earlier, or doing a coconut pull just so that like you have less cavities when you're older, like all these little tiny things that are very, very hard to build. Those are on you to build, and you essentially just have to ask yourself the question, like, okay, I want to be the kind of person who writes a book. Then you have to get up every morning and write. You have to find time in your day. Or I want to be the kind of person who gets out of the rat race. Then for now, you're going to have to work a little bit harder, which sounds counterintuitive. But in order to get yourself out, you have to have like an exit plan, right? So I think that's a good thing to think about just when you're thinking about small habits to start, is how do you start your day and how do you end your day? Like, what are you thinking about before you go to sleep? Because that's also important, because your brain is never off. So before you go to sleep, if you're sitting in thoughts of doubt or whatever, then you're going to dream about that and you're going to wake up feeling terrible. So I challenge you, before you go to bed tonight, to think about a positive thing or to think about your plan, and allow your mind to simmer and to gather some hope instead of some doubt. I will be back in a couple minutes with the last segment.
Now on digital and DVD.
Hit it.
Space Wars: Quest for the Deep Star is an epic sci-fi adventure.
Do what needs to be done.
An edge-of-your-seat wild ride.
We have company.
Tons of popcorn-munching fun. 5 stars. A love letter to the sci-fi films of the 70s and 80s. With plenty of action and fun for all. You need to see it. You really do.
The captain just decided it's time to go.
I am ready for a sequel. Experience a bold new adventure. Space Wars: Quest for the Deep Star.
A good old-fashioned adventure.
Now on digital and DVD.
Shopping for a new home is an exciting time, and the mortgage process just got easier. New American Funding's all-digital mortgage application takes all the hassle out of applying for a mortgage. Simply put in your information and we do the rest. Safely and securely verify your income, assets, and tax information electronically. Plus, you get access to track the progress of your application anytime, anywhere. Less questions, less paperwork, less hassle, and instant access. Ready to start shopping for your new home? Let's get started.
Welcome back to Mental Melodies. This is our last segment of our 7th episode. That's crazy. I'm going to have to go back and reflect on that because I don't know where I lost one when I was counting. But again, just like I said in the beginning, I'm just grateful for everybody listening. It gives me a lot of hope to know that people want to hear what I have to say, because like I've said in past episodes, I just believe that I'm meant to share these things because I've been through a lot and I've experienced a lot and I've learned a lot, and I've consciously learned how to deal with the things that I've been through in a way that I think is very helpful to other people, and I'm grateful for that, and I don't take like that for granted. And I think being in a kind of like leadership position or in a spot where I can help others heal is just really, really cool. And I even remember back when I was 17 and I had a really tumultuous senior year of high school. I was like living in foster care because of stuff that had happened with my stepfather, and I went to college and I wanted to there were two different things I wanted to do. And one was to like create an entirely different identity and pretend that it never happened. And the other was I acknowledged that these things happened to me for a reason, but I was 17 or 18 and I didn't really know what that meant. And now, how many years? Oh my gosh, math. Like 15 years later, I am now seeing what that was. And it's so interesting how like you can plant seeds without being aware. I think it's more powerful to plant seeds when you are aware. This is something I've been talking about, like intentions. Something last year when I was struggling with this one part of me. That was a trauma part that would come out when I was singing on stage, and I would be completely tone deaf. And I'm not tone deaf, I'm a singer. But there was this part that would come out, and it was related to my trauma, and I was dealing with that for a summer. And what I did was I sat there and I told myself, like, I believe that I will heal from this. I believe that this is temporary. And I gave myself a mantra. I trust myself, I trust my voice, I trust my ears. I trust myself, I trust my voice, I trust my ears. And I said that over and over again for days and days and days. And then I started to see how that enveloped in my life, and how my singing changed, and how my relationship with my instruments and music in general and being on stage and microphones and all of that changed. And I also had to obviously actively heal from what was bringing that part out and what was triggering that. So I was thinking about how to tie in this song. This is the one I tried to sing last week, and if you were here, I just couldn't remember the words at all. And I had gone through this whole manic stage where I was trying to write this song, and another song came out, and it just took me a really long time, and it was this whole soul-searching thing, and I was like on the floor just before last week's episode, finished the song at like 3:15, and then came on the episode and tried to play it, and it was just simply too soon, and I was forcing it, which is something I said in that one song. Sometimes you force things, and most times you shouldn't force things. You have to let things flow, right? And where was I going with this? Oh, how do I tie this song into this week? Because this week feels a lot more positive than last week, in the sense that last week we were talking about how like you have to acknowledge the bad parts of life. So when I think about like how to encourage people who are dealing with PTSD and who aren't yet where I am at, like you're still being plagued with those memories or those flashbacks, or you're constantly in a state of fear or negative emotions, what I want to do is I want to continue to acknowledge that, again, that experience is so valid. And you do need to take your time to be able to heal from those things. And it's not, in that example of narrative therapy that I mentioned, it's not just about like searching really hard for the good and then retelling your story. You have to process those negative things that are coming up, because essentially what's happening is they're begging for your attention. If you think back to like, okay, I was 5 years old and this thing happened to me. How did my 5-year-old self feel? They felt abandoned, or they felt uncertain, or they felt unseen or unloved, and all of those things. Those are parts of yourself that were ignored. You essentially have to go back and build a relationship with that part of you, and also tell that part of you they're not there anymore. And this goes back to that parts of memory technique that I was talking about. You can literally go into your memories, find that version of yourself, and let them know that they're not stuck there, because that is what is happening literally in your subconscious mind, is you have parts of you that are stuck in those traumatic memories. If that sounds a little voodoo-y to you, just think about what PTSD is and how these memories keep popping up in your brain. They keep popping up in your brain because there's a part of you that's literally living there, right? So I go back to what I said in the beginning of the episode, that quote that I read, like, you want to go to your past as a point of referral, but you don't want to live there. If you are living there and you don't want to be there anymore, there are ways to get out of it. And again, that's where it like comes back to you. So this song is just about how life includes everything, right? I talk about this all the time, like how there are opposites in life, and there's yin and yang. And yes, it's valid to say that like, maybe I want to experience more happiness or more love or more positivity, but life has all of it, and you have to acknowledge all of it and not ignore it in order to get to a point where you can be where you want to be positive-wise. So with that, let's sing a song. I don't know what the meaning of life is. So my best guess, I guess, is that it must be something pretty close to happiness, because what is life without that? Why should I ever have to feel sad? What is life without that? And what is life anyway? Well, it might be true that the meaning of life is love, but then it would be true too that you would have to feel grief too. 'Cause what is life without that? And why should I ever have to feel sad? What is life without that? And what is life anyway? So if I could choose what to do, I would sing and let life be everything. 'Cause what is life without it all? And why should I ever make it small? What is life without it all? And if I could choose how to feel, I'd feel it all and sing about it. 'Cause what is life without that? What is life anyway? Thank you. Thank you. That's called What is Life Anyway? And it's just been a really honestly beautiful journey writing that song. I've learned a lot about myself, and yeah, so I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it spoke to you. Where are we at on time? A few minutes? Yeah. So let's see. Next week, I will most likely have another guest, so look forward to that, but we will see. I just need some confirmation. If you want to be a guest on the show, I mentioned this a few weeks ago, I will want to meet with you ahead of time. So just reach out to me. You can email me directly, or you can reach out to Maria and she can send you my way. And I want you to think about these things before you do reach out. What is it that you want out of being on the show? What is it that you want other people also to hear or to get out of it? So just really reflect on that. Don't reach out on a whim. Give yourself a day or two to think about that, and then reach out. So that way we can have a very meaningful conversation, because the time here also should be a very meaningful conversation. And with that, if you want to sponsor the show, please reach out to admin@socialmediashows.com. You can find me on Instagram, Carmynn_Bradley. And I just once again appreciate you. Thank you for your eyes and your ears. And I will see you next week for the 8th episode of Mental Melodies. Yay! Thank you, everyone. I ever make it small? What is life without it all? And if I could choose